name's Andy Lunsford. I'm CEO of BreachRX. I grew up in Fayetteville, Arkansas. I spent 12 years in Washington, D.C., and most recently relocated to San Francisco.
When was that? When did you move to San Francisco?
January of 2020.
Oh, so you got there right before the
yeah. 3 months before the pandemic, so I went straight into quarantine.
you basically moved into your bedroom.
Yeah.
I like it. All right, you mentioned BreachRX. So, what do you guys do?
We have built a dynamic incident readiness and response platform that automates workflows for privacy teams. We ultimately are taking the crisis out of incident response and turning it into a routine business process.
So something that seems like it's more and more relevant. I live in Baltimore. Our local school district just had a big incident, and it's only going to happen more and more. But curious, like, what was the insight that sparked you to launch this business?
Yeah, so I'm an attorney. I've spent 15 years in privacy law and commercial litigation. So I've been living in this privacy space for a long time, and just seeing how we kept having new regulations go into place. So now we have one in every state, every country in the world. And there's real penalties being associated with failing to notify, failing to follow the right procedures after an incident happens. And so seeing that trend, as we also were seeing the common, how much more common breaches were, it felt like there was a real opportunity to help companies deal with this in a much more automated way, to save themselves a lot of time and pain from the process.
And it was GDPR, like the thing that kicked it off. I know they have that 1 or 2% revenue. I mean, and that's real.
Yeah. So I actually started thinking about this idea in, I'd say, like 2016. I was going to business school and really wanted to. I'd been working in a large scale commercial litigation, and I was looking to build a business in this space, and just was thinking about what I would do in the privacy space. And so GDPR was proposed. It wasn't in place yet, but I'd just seen the trends for several years. I just could see the writing on the wall. And so that's where I kind of started thinking about it, but I didn't officially jump into doing this full time until 2018.
So timing seems to be, a really important characteristic for making businesses kind of go or not go. It feels like the timing is now. Curious if you agree, and what other signs you're seeing, or just lots of laws changing. And
yeah, absolutely. I think we've seen the cost of breaches goes up, the frequency has gone up, and then the regulations are shifting. They're getting more strict too. So like we just saw this year, Singapore is proposing a 10% penalty on 10% of revenue as a potential penalty on a breach. Canada just had one for 5%. India's has 4%, South Korea is 3%. We already know about GDPR is at 4% of revenue. So these are really serious penalties for any size company. And so I think that everybody, it just needs to have their ducks in a row and be ready to deal with this stuff.
My guess is that concept of like having your ducks in the row is something that most people have no idea what they're supposed to be doing. Or, I mean, even if you're on top of this, you just described, I know GDPR, I know California privacy, I know Brazil did something.
Yeah.
But you just named 4 other countries that I had no idea were doing things. So, how do you even start? And, what do you recommend to folks?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we've seen, people do is they have this kind of like start this sort of like a continuum of where people kind of grow with their sort of education on the space. And I think some people start with their head in the sand, just think, oh, I'll just call outside counsel when this stuff happens. But just dealing with even a scare of an incident that doesn't result in major penalties, usually people figure out pretty quickly that just thinking you're going to call outside counsel is a terrible way to approach it. So then you start thinking about doing more proactive preparedness, and people start with spreadsheets and checklists and that kind of thing. But because the nature of this problem is it's so dynamic, the regulations keep changing, your contractual obligations keep changing, the threat landscape keeps changing. You really need a system that is capable of being flexible enough to handle that rapid change and keeps up with the pace. And so that's again why we've created BreachRX. We think that having a dynamic solution that can handle that is what every company is going to ultimately need.
So I guess that's the next question is, you look a couple of years out, entrepreneurs start things because they have this vision of what what the world's going to look like. What do you think the world looks like in a couple of years with all this stuff? Does it just, yeah, and how do you guys fit into the middle of all of that?
Yeah, so I think, data breaches and incidents, started with really being a security issue, and mostly it was just the security teams handle this. And then we've seen all these regulations happen, so legal has become involved. And what we're seeing in organizations is that those two teams don't often speak the same language, and so they kind of look at each other like they're a black box and don't really understand what the other is doing. What we see as the future is that these teams are really going to be forced to merge together in a way and be really seamless in the way they work through these incidents that are going to happen to everybody. And so we really sit in a place that sits between them that's going to help facilitate that. And that's really where we see the world going.
Is there a corollary to another space that you see? Like, we want to be the, like I think the movie log lines, like we are, Top Gun meets, whatever it is. Is there some other company that you guys think about that's really done a good job of cementing themselves in the space that?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of different companies that we think about that could be like, kind of are a number of different areas. I think they could fit in that way. I think one of probably the easiest way that we've been talking about it to folks that are very familiar with cybersecurity is that we saw this kind of trajectory of cybersecurity started with very manual approaches, and there was a big focus on the data and these SIM systems that would pull all this data together. And then eventually coming the other direction, less on the data and more on the action, were these SOAR platforms. So like the Demistos of the world, the Resilience, et cetera. And we see like a similar path happening in the privacy space. So everything's very manual right now. We see some companies starting to talk about privacy operations that kind of looks a lot like SIMs do in the cybersecurity space. But there's this opportunity for privacy orchestration, because beyond the privacy incidents themselves, these breaches, there's a ton of other parts of these privacy regs that have to be orchestrated across the business. And so we kind of, that's where we see the world going. So I think there's kind of a nice parallel there. Another company we really look at a lot is Carta. They have an interesting model of, providing a really great service for a lot of companies, and they're really ingrained with law firms. So like you have to have a law firm do your cap table in Carta, because especially in major incidents, companies want to call an outside counsel, and we've designed our platform to do that. We think there's an opportunity there for everybody to have their outside counsel on the BreachRX platform, and being a way to help facilitate that, and again, just make things more efficient. Gotcha.
What is something unexpected that you learned this year? I'm sure you learned a lot as an early stage company. You learned a lot in moving to San Francisco, but I'm curious, what's something unexpected you learned?
Yeah, well, I mean, as you said, like as an entrepreneur, like you're learning so much every day. It's like a fire hose. I mean, it's what I love about it. And I can see why so many people become serial entrepreneurs, because there's just nothing to replicate the amount of learning you get to have on a daily basis. But I think about one thing, I think it's probably a bigger picture issue. When COVID struck and everybody went into lockdown, and you kind of had this thought of like, oh my gosh, how are all these companies that are not used to operating this way going to actually handle this? And like, obviously there are some industries that rely on in-person stuff that have been decimated by the pandemic, but I've really been surprised to see how many companies have been really resilient and being able to just quickly adapt their working environments to still move forward in this kind of unprecedented time.
Sure. You mentioned the entrepreneurship journey, and I think that what I've learned by doing it a couple of times is you have a lot of highs, a lot of lows. What's something you do to kind of keep inspired and motivated?
I'm a big fan of music. So when it's not a pandemic, I love live music. But what I find is at kind of different times in my life, I get into a certain song or a certain album, and it can kind of become like my anthem for kind of getting my energy up, whenever you're riding some of those tougher times. So I'd say that's my that's my go-to for kind of inspiration. Right now I've been really loving, it's a song from Bruce Springsteen called The Rising, It
Sure.
was for 9/11 is why he created it, but
Yep.
I feel like it really resonates with me both with the current pandemic, but also just the way you kind of think about going into things with entrepreneurship. You know, you just have to, rise to the occasion.
I love it. On that note, besides Springsteen, who I admire and respect, who do you admire and respect? Like anybody you kind of look up to and say, "Wow, pretty awesome what they've done."
Yeah, so mine is like not a public person, but my late grandmother has always been a kind of source of inspiration to me. She, when my mom's like the second oldest of 5 kids. When she was 5 years old, her dad died in a car accident, and my grandmother raised that entire family of 5 kids. It's a solo, parent all the way through. Didn't get remarried till they were all like adults, in their 30s. And just like thinking about the kind of opportunities she had from a work perspective that are probably a lot more limited at that time, and then to be able to successfully raise 5 great kids that are fantastic people, and just all the different stories that they share about like how they got through stuff that was tough. I love the like resilient stories. Those are always just super inspiring to me.
Yeah, no, it's pretty. That's pretty awesome, and I think that having 2 kids myself, I couldn't imagine that. I mean, just kind of couldn't even start to think about that. What's a fun fact about you or the team that most people don't know about?
Yeah, I think so I mentioned how I lived in Washington, D.C. for 12 years, and I joined this Alchemist Accelerator program out here in San Francisco. And part of the idea of coming out here to join the program was, thinking, okay, San Francisco Bay Area is a great place to recruit talent. And, I was looking to bring in a highly technical co-founder with a big background in cybersecurity. And through a contact out here, I get introduced to Matt Hartley, my co-founder, who actually lives in the DC area about 10 miles from where I was living before I moved all the way across the country to San Francisco.
That's pretty awesome. What can folks listening, watching do to help you achieve your goals?
I'd say any, tech forward, legal, compliance, privacy oriented folks that are looking to get a handle on incident response for their organization, please reach out. We'd love to help you out.
All righty. Well, listen, thank you for taking a few minutes and joining us today. Really enjoyed it. And
yeah, thank you.
You guys are doing some pretty cool stuff. And I think we're super psyched to be tracking you guys. And I think lots of other folks that are watching this will be as well.
Appreciate it, Zach. Thank you.
Thanks.